My fiancé told me he was leaving to move in with his ex-girlfriend and that they were expecting a baby together. I replied, "Congratulations," then canceled his engagement ring, returned the car, and changed every password. 6 hours later, he was at my door, sobbing that she had kicked him out. Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Weston. I'm 35 years old, and I've always believed that when something ends, it usually doesn't end in the exact moment it is finally spoken out loud. It ends before that, quietly, in changes so small you can explain them away if you want to. A delay in someone's voice, a new habit with a phone, a strange distance during ordinary conversations, a kind of absence that still sits beside you at dinner and sleeps in your bed and asks whether you remembered to buy coffee filters. I used to think those things were part of adulthood. Stress, fatigue, life. When you're with someone long enough, you learn not to dramatize every shift. You tell yourself stability doesn't always look romantic. Sometimes it looks like laundry folded together, rent paid on time, shared calendars, grocery lists, quiet evenings that don't need performance to feel real. That was the kind of relationship I thought I had with Daniel. We had been together for almost 4 years, engaged for 7 months, and somewhere along the line, our life had settled into a shape that felt dependable. We weren't the couple posting every milestone or trying to prove anything to anyone. We had routines. We had responsibilities. We had future plans written in half-finished sentences and browser tabs and conversations about wedding dates and kitchen colors and whether we wanted to stay in the city for another 2 years or finally leave and buy a place somewhere quieter. From the outside, we looked steady. From the inside, I thought we were. That is probably the part that stayed with me the longest. Not that he betrayed me, but that he managed to do it while still letting me believe I was living inside something solid. The night he told me, there was no argument leading up to it. No visible crack. No dramatic buildup. I had just finished rinsing a wine glass and setting it upside down on the drying mat when he walked into the kitchen with that expression people get when they've already had the real conversation with themselves and are only there to deliver the final version to you. I remember drying my hands slowly. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember noticing, absurdly, that one of the under-cabinet lights had started flickering again. "Claire," he said, and his tone was so measured it chilled me faster than shouting would have. "I need to tell you something." Even then, I didn't panic. At 35, you learn that the sentence "I need to tell you something" can mean anything. Job loss, family illness, debt, regret, fear, a mistake. I turned to face him and waited. He didn't pace. He didn't look torn apart. He stood there with his hands loose at his sides like he had rehearsed being calm and wanted me to notice. "I'm leaving," he said. Just that at first. Simple, controlled, clean. And before I could respond, he added the rest. "I'm moving in with Vanessa. She's pregnant. It's mine." There are moments in life that should feel loud, but don't. That one didn't. It didn't feel like a crash. It felt like a room changing temperature, like something invisible locking into place. For a few seconds, I didn't say anything. Not because I was confused, but because confusion would have required missing pieces. There weren't any. The sentence explained itself. Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend, the one he had always described as old history, the one whose name came up just rarely enough to stay plausible, the one he once dismissed with a shrug and a laugh when I asked why she still reacted to his posts online. I stood there holding a dish towel in both hands and understood in one sharp, silent instant that the relationship I thought I was in had already ended somewhere before this conversation ever happened. Maybe weeks earlier, maybe months. Maybe in every quiet moment I chose to interpret generously because love, when it is serious, teaches you to leave room for another person's imperfections. He kept speaking. I remember that. I just don't remember every word in order because none of them mattered as much as the fact that his voice had no tremor in it, no hesitation, no visible guilt strong enough to interrupt the performance of certainty. He said it just happened. He said he hadn't planned for it. He said he didn't know how to tell me sooner. He said Vanessa needed him. As if I was supposed to respect the logistics of my own replacement. I looked at him for a long moment, really looked, at the familiar face I had once imagined seeing across from me when we were 50. At the mouth that now moved so carefully around the edges of a confession that must have been living inside him long before tonight. At the posture of a man who was not asking to be forgiven, not asking to be understood, only informing me that his decision had already hardened somewhere beyond my reach. That detail mattered. Because when someone speaks like that, they are not inviting conversation. They are announcing an outcome. And once I understood that, something inside me did not break. It went still. "Congratulations," I said. That was all. No screaming. No questions. No begging for honesty after the honesty had finally arrived too late to matter. For the first time that night, something in his face shifted. Not guilt, not exactly. More like surprise. He had expected impact. Maybe tears. Maybe anger. Maybe an emotional scene dramatic enough to help him feel justified in leaving. Maybe he wanted proof that he had shattered something important. Instead, I gave him calm. It unsettled him. "I know this is a lot," he said, and there was a slight frown between his brows now, as if my reaction had forced him off script. I almost laughed at that. A lot. As though this were a scheduling conflict. As though the issue was volume, not betrayal. But I didn't laugh. I didn't raise my voice either. I just set the dish towel down on the counter and leaned one hand against the edge of the sink because suddenly I needed the cool stone beneath my palm. Not for support, just for contact with something real. "When are you leaving?" I asked. That threw him more than the congratulations had. "Tonight," he said after a beat. "I already packed some things." Of course he had. That explained why the closet had seemed slightly off that morning, though I hadn't stopped long enough to identify why. One less garment bag, empty space where two of his jackets should have been, tiny absences, quiet evidence. "I see," I said. He looked at me the way people look at someone they can no longer read. "Claire." There was softness in my name then, but it wasn't love, it was discomfort. A man realizing the woman he expected to collapse was instead becoming very clear. I held his gaze. "You should take everything you need." He blinked. "That's it?" That question told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't shocked that I was hurt. He was shocked that I wasn't performing hurt for him. "That's enough," I said. For a second, I thought he might try to start an argument anyway, just to drag the moment into terrain he understood better. But he didn't. Maybe because even he could feel that something irreversible had already happened in the space between his confession and my response. He nodded once and walked toward the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen. I listened to drawers opening, closet doors sliding, hangers knocking together, the ordinary sounds of a shared life being partially removed. It should have felt surreal, but it didn't. It felt precise, like the final click of a lock after the door has already been closed. I looked around the apartment while he packed. The frame print near the hallway. The plant by the window he always forgot to water. The coffee mugs we bought on that rainy weekend trip 3 states over. Our life was everywhere, but suddenly I could see its structure more clearly than I ever had while we were still inside it together. What belonged to me? What belonged to him? What had been shared because I believed we were building toward permanence? That belief was gone now. And once it was gone, everything else became practical. He came back out 20 minutes later with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a small suitcase trailing behind him. He paused near the front door like he was waiting for some final scene to rise up between us. It didn't. I walked over, opened the door, and stepped aside. His face tightened. "Claire, I never wanted to hurt you." That was the first lie of the night that almost got a reaction out of me. Not because it was cruel. Because it was lazy. People say that when they want credit for pain, they deliver it as neatly as possible. I looked at him and answered honestly. "I think you wanted what you wanted more than you cared what it cost." He stared at me. That landed. Not loudly, but directly. For the first time, he seemed to lose part of the clean composure he had walked in with. His grip on the suitcase handle shifted. His jaw tightened. Maybe he was waiting for me to soften after saying it. Maybe he wanted me to take it back and turn this into something messier and more mutual. I didn't. After a moment, he nodded once. Then he walked out. I closed the door gently behind him. Not a slam, just a click. And the apartment changed. Not emotionally at first, structurally. Like a beam had been removed and suddenly you could see which parts of the house had been leaning on it. I stood there in the quiet foyer for a few seconds, listening to nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no second knock, no last-minute reversal. Just silence, real silence. I could have cried then. Maybe another version of me would have. But what I felt was stranger and colder and, in its own way, more useful. Clarity. He had made a decision before speaking it. Now I was going to make mine. I turned, walked back into the kitchen, picked up my phone, and opened the first account that still connected us. The first thing I opened was our joint banking app. Not because it mattered most, because it was the simplest. Numbers don't pretend. They don't soften themselves to protect feelings. They don't rewrite timelines. They don't wait for emotional readiness. They just show you what is there, and more importantly, what no longer is. I sat down at the kitchen counter, the same place where we had once talked about honeymoon destinations, and logged in. Balance, transactions, shared expenses. Everything looked normal, which somehow made it worse. because normal meant he had already decided to leave while still paying half the electricity bill, while still transferring money into savings, while still living inside a life he had already mentally exited. That kind of overlap isn't accidental. It's deliberate. I didn't rush. That's the part people misunderstand when they imagine moments like this. They think there's chaos, panic, emotional urgency. There wasn't. There was a kind of stillness that sharpened everything. I removed his access first. 3 taps. Confirm. Done. Then I transferred my portion of the savings into my personal account. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, out of clarity. That money was built on a future that no longer existed. I left his contributions untouched. Even now, I didn't want anything that belonged to him. I just wasn't going to let him take what belonged to me. The app logged me out automatically after the changes. Clean. Final. Next was the shared subscriptions. Streaming services, grocery delivery, cloud storage. The small, invisible systems that quietly stitch 2 lives together until you forget they were ever separate. I went through them one by one, removed his profile, changed the passwords, disconnected devices. Each action was simple, almost boring, but together they carried weight, because each one erased an assumption that he could still move through my life the way he had yesterday. He couldn't, not anymore. Around midnight, the apartment had settled into a deeper silence. No footsteps overhead, no distant traffic, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of my phone screen reflecting against the counter. I stood up and walked into the bedroom. His side of the closet was half empty now. Not completely. That told me something too. He hadn't left for good. Not in his mind. He had packed like someone stepping into a temporary situation, like someone who believed there would still be a place waiting for him if things didn't work out. I reached for the remaining hangers and slid them all to one side. Space. Clear, visible space. No ambiguity. Then I moved to the dresser. A watch he hadn't worn in months. 2 folded shirts. A drawer with things he had forgotten or chosen not to take. I didn't throw anything away. I didn't destroy anything. I just closed the drawer because none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was structure. And structure was something I could control. Back in the living room, I opened my email. The engagement ring confirmation was still there. Custom order, non-refundable deposit, delivery expected in 3 weeks. I stared at the message for a moment. I remembered the day I ordered it. The hesitation I felt before clicking confirm, not because I doubted him, but because I understood what it meant to choose something permanent. I had chosen. He hadn't. I opened the support chat. "Hi," I typed. "I need to cancel an order." There was a pause, then a response. "I'm sorry to hear that. May I ask the reason?" I looked at the blinking cursor. For a second, I considered telling the truth. My fiancé left me for his ex and got her pregnant. Instead, I wrote, "Change of circumstances." They processed the request. Deposit partially recoverable. Fine. Money wasn't the point. Finality was. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair, letting my head rest against the wall behind me. It was past 1 in the morning now. Somewhere, he was building a new life, or at least trying to. I wondered what it looked like, not in a jealous way, in a structural way. Was it stable? Was it already cracking? Did she know everything? Did she believe him? Did he sound as certain there as he had sounded here? The questions came and went. None of them stayed, because none of them changed what had already happened. I stood up again and grabbed my keys. There was one more thing. The car. Technically, we both used it. In reality, it was in my name. Insurance, registration, payments, all mine. He liked to drive it. That was different from owning it. I slipped on my shoes and stepped out into the hallway. The building was quiet. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, though the numbers changed at the same steady pace. When I reached the garage, the air was cooler, heavier. The car was parked exactly where we had left it that morning. I walked over, unlocked it, and sat in the driver's seat. For a moment, I just held the steering wheel. Not emotionally, practically. Then I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the spare key he kept there. I turned the engine on. The dashboard lit up. Familiar. Uncomplicated. I drove it out of the garage and onto the street. No destination in mind at first. Just motion. Just the act of moving something out of a shared space and into my control. Eventually, I parked it a few blocks away. Close enough. Not accessible. I took both keys with me when I got out. When I returned to the apartment, it was nearly 3. Everything was quiet again. But different now. Not empty. Reset. I locked the door behind me, walked straight to the kitchen, and opened my phone one more time. Passwords. Every account. Every access point. Email. Cloud. Home system. Door code. I changed all of them. Carefully. Deliberately. No overlap. No patterns. No familiarity. By the time I was done, there was nothing left that connected him to this space without my permission. Nothing he could walk back into. Nothing he could assume. I placed my phone down on the counter and looked around one last time. Same apartment, same furniture, same life, but structurally different. He had left thinking he still existed inside it. He didn't. And by the time he realized that, it would already be too late. The knocking started just after 7. Not loud, not aggressive, but persistent. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Like he was trying to be respectful of a boundary he didn't fully understand yet. I was already awake. I hadn't slept much, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. My mind hadn't been racing. It had been organized, quietly putting things in place. I knew it was him before I even got out of bed. There's a rhythm to people you've lived with long enough. The way they knock, the way they hesitate between attempts, the way they assume the door will open eventually. I didn't rush. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, tied my hair back. Routine, ordinary. The same sequence I followed every morning, except this time there was no one else in the apartment moving around behind me. The knocking came again. Softer now, less certain. I walked to the door and stood there for a moment, my hand resting lightly on the handle. Not bracing, just pausing. Then I opened it. Daniel stood there, and for a second, the difference between last night and this morning was so sharp, it almost felt like looking at 2 different people. The composure was gone. Completely. His eyes were red, not just from crying, but from lack of sleep. His hair was slightly damp, like he had splashed water on his face in a hurry. His shirt was wrinkled, thrown on without care, and the expression, the one he had practiced so carefully the night before, had been replaced with something raw and unstructured. Panic. Relief flickered across his face the second he saw me. Claire. He said my name like it was something solid he had been trying to reach all night. I didn't step back. I didn't invite him in. I just stood there, holding the door open enough for conversation, not enough for assumption. "What is it?" I asked. My voice sounded the same as it had last night. That seemed to unsettle him more than anything. He started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Can I come in?" "No." I didn't say it harshly, just clearly. The word landed between us, simple and immovable. He blinked, like he hadn't expected resistance at this stage of whatever script he had in his head. "It's cold out here," he said, a little too quickly. "It's not." Another pause. His breathing was uneven. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just off, like his body hadn't caught up with whatever had happened after he walked out of this apartment. "Something happened," he said. I waited. He looked over his shoulder briefly, as if checking whether anyone in the hallway could hear him, then leaned slightly closer to the door. "Vanessa, he exhaled sharply. "She told me to leave." There it was. Not the full story, but enough to confirm the outline. I didn't react. Not outwardly. Inside, something clicked into place with quiet precision. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just confirmation of what I had already suspected when I saw the half-empty closet. He hadn't left with certainty. He had left with expectation. Expectation that the next step would hold. Expectation that the story he chose would continue smoothly. Expectation that if it didn't, there would still be something here waiting for him. He looked at me like he was waiting for a question. I didn't give him one. "Why?" I asked after a moment. Not because I needed the answer, because I wanted to see how he would explain it. He hesitated. That was new. Last night, everything had come out clean, structured, justified. Now there was a fracture in that delivery. "She said things got complicated," he muttered. Complicated. Such a small word. Such a vague one. I tilted my head slightly. Complicated how? He swallowed. "She didn't expect me to actually leave," he admitted. "She thought I was just saying things, that I needed time, that I wasn't serious." I held his gaze. "And you were?" I asked. The question hung there. Simple. Sharp. He looked away first. "I thought I was," he said quietly. Thought. Past tense. There it was. The shift. Not in what had happened, but in how he was now framing it. He shifted his weight, like the ground beneath him had become unstable. "I messed up," he said more urgently now. "Claire, I messed up." I said nothing. He took a step closer to the threshold. Instinctively, like proximity might rebuild something that had already been dismantled. She said I rushed everything," he continued, "that I made it real too fast, that she's not ready for—" He cut himself off, frustrated. "I don't know, it fell apart." Of course it did, but I didn't say that. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "And the baby?" His jaw tightened. "She says it's mine." Says. Another small word. Another fracture. "But," I pressed, He hesitated again. Then, quietly, "She's not sure anymore." Silence settled between us. Not heavy, not dramatic, just clear. The kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. The kind that lets truth sit exactly where it is. He looked at me again, searching this time. Not for understanding, for something else. An opening, a signal. Anything that suggested the version of me from yesterday still existed in a form he could return to. "Claire," he said, softer now, "can we just talk?" We were talking. But that wasn't what he meant. He meant reset, re-entry, reversal. I leaned slightly against the doorframe, studying him the way I had studied the apartment last night. Structurally, what was still intact, what had already collapsed, what he thought he could rebuild. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. His expression faltered. "Yes, there is," he insisted quickly. "I shouldn't have left like that. I should have, I don't know, handled it differently. I thought I knew what I was doing." "You did," I said. He froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't soften it either. "You knew exactly what you were doing," I continued. "You just didn't know what would happen after." That landed harder than anything I had said so far, because it was precise, because it didn't give him room to reinterpret what he had done as confusion or impulse. It was a decision, followed by miscalculation. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. "I didn't think she'd react like that," he said. No, he hadn't. And more importantly, he hadn't thought I would react like this either. "I need somewhere to stay," he said after a moment. There it was. Not apology, not accountability. Need. Direct, immediate, practical. I looked at him for a long second. Then I asked calmly, "Why would that be here?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Because even he could hear how that sounded now. Not last night, but now, after everything. I thought, he started. Exactly, he thought. He had thought there would be a fallback. A space held in reserve. A version of me that would absorb the impact of his decisions and still make room for him afterward. I straightened slightly, my hands still resting on the door. "You should go," I said. His eyes widened. "Claire, please." "No." The word came out the same way it had before. Not louder, not colder, just final. For a moment he stood there, caught between disbelief and realization, between the version of the story he expected and the one that was actually unfolding. And then, slowly, it started to sink in. He didn't leave right away. That was the first sign he hadn't fully understood yet. Most people, when they hear something final, step back. They register it. They retreat, even if they don't accept it. There's a physical response to rejection, a shift, a pause, a kind of instinctive withdrawal. Daniel didn't. He stayed where he was, just outside the door, like proximity might still negotiate something for him. "Claire, just listen to me for a second," he said, quieter now. Careful. Not confident. Careful. That was new. I didn't move. "You have a second," I said. Not an invitation. A boundary with a clock on it. He nodded quickly, like he'd been given something valuable. "It's not what it looked like," he started. And there it was. The first attempt to reshape reality. Not a lie exactly, something more familiar. A rearrangement. A softening. The beginning of a version of events that might feel easier to carry if I agreed to it. I said nothing. He filled the silence. "I didn't plan for this to happen like this," he continued. "Things with Vanessa, they were already complicated before. We were talking again, yeah, but it wasn't serious. Not at first." Not at first. I leaned slightly against the frame, watching him. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. "A fraction too long." "About 2 months," he said. 2 months. I did the math without reacting. 2 months of conversations I didn't know about. 2 months of messages sent while sitting across from me at dinner. 2 months of overlap. "That's when she told you she was pregnant?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "That was later, a few weeks ago." Weeks, not days. Weeks of knowing. Weeks of deciding. Weeks of letting me continue living inside a future that had already started dissolving. "And you didn't think to tell me then?" I asked. The question wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. He flinched anyway. "I didn't know how," he said. That answer might have worked once, maybe even recently. But now, standing here after everything had already unfolded, it sounded exactly like what it was. Convenient. "You knew how to leave," I said. His jaw tightened. "That's not fair," he replied, a little too fast. Fair. I almost smiled at that. Because fairness implies a shared agreement. A set of rules both people are still honoring. We weren't in that kind of conversation anymore. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not." That stopped him. Not because I agreed, but because I removed the argument entirely. He exhaled slowly, like he was trying to reset again. "Look, she told me she needed me," he said. "She said she couldn't do this alone, that if I didn't step up now, I'd regret it forever." "And you believed her," I said. "Yes." No hesitation. That part at least was honest. And what changed? I asked. He looked down briefly, then back up. She didn't want me there, he admitted. Not like that. Not immediately. She said I was making things messy, that I should have handled things differently before showing up. Handled things differently. I let that sit. You mean before leaving your fiancé? I asked. His expression tightened again. I didn't think... I know, I said. And I did. That was the problem. He hadn't thought. Not about consequences. Not about structure. Not about permanence. He had acted inside a moment that felt urgent to him and assumed everything else would adjust around it. It didn't. She said she needs space, he continued more quietly now. Time to figure things out. That showing up like that, it just made everything worse. Of course it did. Because reality isn't as clean as imagination. Because decisions don't stay contained once you act on them. Because people don't always respond the way you expect when you finally choose them. And the baby? I asked again. His shoulders dropped slightly. She's not sure, he said. She said she needs to confirm things, that I shouldn't assume anything yet. There it was, the foundation of his decision. Unstable, unverified, built on urgency, not certainty. And now he was standing here, trying to reconstruct something from the pieces. I didn't expect it to go like this, he said. That sentence again. Expectation. Not regret. Not responsibility. Expectation. I looked at him for a long moment. Really looked. At the man who had stood in the same doorway last night, composed and certain, delivering a decision like it had already been finalized by something larger than both of us. And the man standing here now, uncertain, unsettled, rewriting. You expected it to work, I said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Yes, I continued quietly. You expected her to welcome you. You expected everything to fall into place. And you expected that if it didn't... I let the sentence hang for a second. Watched his face. You could come back here. That was the moment. The shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but visible. Because for the first time since he knocked on the door, he didn't try to argue. Didn't try to correct me. Didn't try to explain. He just stood there. Caught. Not in a lie. In a truth he hadn't planned to say out loud. I didn't think of it like that, he said finally. Of course he didn't. Because thinking of it like that would have required acknowledging what he was actually doing. And that would have made it harder to do. I straightened slightly, my hand still resting against the door. But that's what you did, I said. No anger. No emphasis. Just alignment. His throat moved as he swallowed. I didn't want to lose you, he said. That one almost sounded real. Almost. But timing matters. And some sentences lose their meaning depending on when they're said. You already did, I replied. Soft. Immediate. Final. He closed his eyes briefly, like the words had weight. Like they landed somewhere deeper than the rest. When he opened them again, there was something different there. Not panic. Not exactly. Recognition. Slow. Unavoidable. Like someone realizing they had been standing on a structure they thought was stable, and only now noticing the cracks had already spread too far. Claire, he said again, quieter now. But this time, he didn't know what came after my name. And that was the first honest thing he had brought with him to the door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway was quiet in that early morning way. No footsteps, no elevators moving, no distant conversations leaking through walls, just the soft hum of a building waking up somewhere far below us. Daniel stood there, looking at me like he was waiting for something to shift, for me to soften, for the door to open wider, for the version of this story he had imagined to finally catch up with reality. It didn't. Claire, I know I messed up, he said again, slower this time, more careful with each word. But we can fix this. There it was. Not apology, not understanding. Repair. As if this were damage to an object, a crack in something still fundamentally intact. I watched him for a few seconds before answering. There's nothing to fix, I said. He shook his head immediately, too fast. No, don't say that. We had something real. You know that. This doesn't erase everything. Doesn't erase everything. That's how he was framing it. Like this was a disruption. A mistake layered on top of something still solid underneath. He was still standing inside the version of the relationship where history guaranteed continuation. It didn't. It doesn't erase everything, I agreed. Hope flickered across his face. Small, fragile, misplaced. But it changes everything, I finished. The hope disappeared just as quickly as it had come. He exhaled, running both hands through his hair now, pacing half a step and then stopping again like he didn't know where to put himself. You're in shock, he said, searching. You don't have to decide anything right now. We can take a few days, talk this through, figure out what makes sense. No, I said. Not louder, not sharper, just placed exactly where it needed to be. He stopped moving. You already decided, I continued. Last night, you didn't come to me to ask what I wanted. You told me what you were doing. That was different, he insisted quickly. I know what you thought. I didn't let him finish. Because I did. I understood it perfectly now. You thought you were choosing something better, I said. Something more urgent. Something that made more sense to you in that moment. He opened his mouth, closed it again, because there wasn't a version of that sentence he could comfortably argue with. And now, I asked? He hesitated. That hesitation said more than any explanation. I made a mistake, he said finally. There it was again. Mistake. A word that shrinks something irreversible into something manageable, something forgivable, something temporary. I shook my head slightly. No, I said, you made a decision. That landed harder. Because a mistake suggests accident. A decision requires ownership. I didn't know it would turn out like this, he said, quieter now. I know. Silence. Then softer. I didn't think I'd lose you. That was the closest thing to honesty he had said since he showed up. And that was exactly why it didn't change anything. Because it wasn't about me. It was about what he assumed would remain available to him. I stepped back slightly, not to let him in, just to put a little more space between us. You didn't lose me this morning, I said. You lost me the moment you decided I was something you could come back to. His face shifted. Confusion, then understanding, then something heavier. Claire, that's not what I meant. It doesn't matter what you meant. I didn't say it harshly, just clearly. Intent doesn't undo impact. That stopped him completely. For a second, he just stood there, looking at me like he was trying to find the version of me that would have argued, cried, demanded something emotional he could respond to. She wasn't there. Not anymore. You're being cold, he said after a moment. Not accusing. Almost confused. I held his gaze. No, I said. I'm being clear. Another pause. Longer this time. He looked past me into the apartment. At the same living room, the same couch, the same space he had walked out of less than 12 hours ago, assuming it would still be accessible if he needed it. Everything looked the same. That was the part that unsettled him, because nothing had actually changed, except his access. Where am I supposed to go? He asked quietly. There it was again. Need. Practical. Immediate. As if logistics could reopen something emotional. That's not my responsibility, I said. His shoulders dropped slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. I thought he started, then stopped. Exactly. He thought. I waited. He didn't finish the sentence. Because now, he could hear it. Whatever version of expectation had lived inside that thought, it didn't survive contact with reality. I reached for the door. Not to slam it. Not to make a point. Just to end the conversation. Claire, wait, he said quickly, stepping forward just a fraction. I paused. Not opening the door wider. Not closing it yet. Just enough space for one last sentence. If this doesn't work out, with her, he said carefully, we could still... That was it. The last piece. The thing he hadn't realized he was still holding on to. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man who still believed in a version of the future where I remained an option. Not a person. An option. And for the first time since he knocked, I almost felt something. Not anger. Something colder. Something cleaner. Understanding. That's exactly the problem, I said quietly. He frowned. What? You think this is something you can come back to, I said. He didn't answer. Didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. I nodded once, more to myself than to him. Then I closed the door. Gently. The same way I had the night before. No sound. No scene. Just a clean final separation. And on the other side of it, I heard nothing. No knocking. No voice. No second attempt. Just silence. The kind that doesn't ask questions anymore. 3 weeks later, my life didn't feel different. That's the part people don't expect. They expect collapse. They expect some visible aftermath. They expect grief to rearrange everything so dramatically that you can point to it and say, this is where it broke. But it didn't feel like that. It felt quieter, cleaner, like a room after something unnecessary has been removed. I still woke up at the same time, still made coffee the same way, still walked past the same window where the light hit the floor in the early morning. Nothing had changed, except everything had, because there was no longer a question sitting underneath my life. No uncertainty, no subtle tension, no quiet negotiation happening in the background of every decision. Just clarity. Daniel didn't come back. Not after that morning. Not in person. But that didn't mean he disappeared. The messages started 2 days later. Short at first. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go like this. I just need to talk. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Out of alignment. Because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said at the door. The messages got longer. More detailed. More emotional. He explained things I already understood. He tried to reframe things I had already seen clearly. He used words like confused, pressure, timing, fear. None of them changed the structure of what happened. None of them changed the fact that when he made his decision, he didn't consider me part of it. And that was the only part that mattered. A week later, he called. Once. Then again. Then 3 times in a row. I watched the screen light up from across the room and let it go dark every time. Silence, when it's chosen, becomes something powerful. Not passive. Not empty. Deliberate. Around the 2nd week, I heard about Vanessa. Not directly from him. From someone else. The kind of indirect update that travels through people who don't realize they're carrying information. She's not pregnant. That was the sentence. Simple. Clean. Final. For a moment, I just stood there, letting it settle. Not because it shocked me, but because it completed the picture. Everything he had built his decision on was gone. Not complicated. Not uncertain. Gone. I didn't feel satisfaction. That's the part people always expect. That moment where everything flips and you feel justified, validated, victorious. I didn't feel any of that, because by the time the truth arrived, I had already moved past needing it. Clarity doesn't depend on confirmation. It stands on its own. A few days after that, he sent one last message. Long, carefully written, like he had taken time to choose every word. I made the worst mistake of my life, it said. I see everything clearly now. I lost the best thing I had because I thought something else mattered more in the moment. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that if there's any chance at all, I would spend the rest of my life making it right. I read it once, all the way through. Then I set my phone down. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just done. Because the message wasn't new. It was just late. And timing changes everything. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below. People moving, cars passing, life continuing in that steady, indifferent way it always does. Nothing paused, nothing waited. And that's when it settled fully. Not as a thought, but as something deeper. He didn't lose me because of what happened with Vanessa. He lost me because of what he believed about me when he made his decision. That I would still be there. That I would still make room. That I would still be an option. And once someone sees you that way, you can't unsee it. You can't rebuild from it. You can't pretend it didn't happen. I picked up my phone again, opened the message thread, scrolled to the bottom, and blocked his number. No speech. No explanation. No final words. Just a clean end. The same way everything else had been. Because closure doesn't always sound like something. Sometimes, it's just silence that you choose to keep.